The wind screamed against the cliffside, a raw, violent sound that rattled the rocks beneath my shoes. I had stood on high ground before, back when life was simple, when my son clung to my hand as a boy afraid of the height. But now, as a 60-year-old woman, I felt fear not because of the abyss below, but because of the man standing beside me, my only surviving son, the boy I had raised with my own hands, the man who was about to kill me. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His gaze was locked on the valley below, on the thin ribbon of river, twisting like a blade in the distance. "You're in the way, Mom," he whispered. 5 words, cold, final, a verdict without a trial. I didn't even have time to ask. In the way of what before I could move, his hand pressed against my shoulder. It began as a touch, a son's hand on his mother, but it hardened, turned into pressure, and then into a shove. The ground vanished beneath me. Air roared in my ears, shredding every scream before it could leave my throat. My stomach lurched, the sky flipped, and the jagged rocks below rushed toward me. Betrayal had a weight, and it pulled me faster than gravity itself. My son's face, my baby's face, was the last thing I saw before the abyss swallowed me whole. I expected darkness. I expected silence. Instead, agony exploded through my body as I crashed against a ledge jutting out from the cliffside. My ribs screamed, my arm snapped. But I was alive. Alive enough to hear a shepherd's distant cry echo through the valley. Alive enough to feel blood warm against my cheek. And alive enough to understand the truth. My own child had tried to erase me. Through the blur of pain, I twisted my head upward. The cliff loomed above, but he was gone. No silhouette, no hesitation, no sign of regret. He had pushed me into nothingness and walked away as if I had never existed. If your own child pushed you off a cliff, would you forgive or would you fight back? Stay with me. This is only the beginning. I don't know how long I drifted in and out of that fog. Pain came in waves, but it wasn't just the agony of broken bones, it was the agony of betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. When my eyes fluttered open, I wasn't staring into the abyss anymore. I was staring at white light, sterile, buzzing cold. A hospital ceiling. The faint beeping of machines told me I was still tethered to life. Henry, my husband, was beside me. His face was pale, his forehead wrapped in gauze, but his eyes, those tired, grief-carved eyes, met mine with a weight I couldn't understand. He reached for my hand, and his grip trembled as if it carried a truth too heavy to hold. "Hilda," he whispered, his voice rasping, "don't move. Pretend to be weaker than you are. For now, let them think you're broken." Confusion burned through my fog. "Them," I croaked, my throat raw. "Henry, what happened?" He swallowed hard, and for the first time in 40 years of marriage, I saw fear in his eyes, not of death, but of memory. "It wasn't the first time Damien tried to kill," he said. "The name of our son stabbed through me, sharper than the IV needle in my arm." I shook my head, but he pressed tighter on my hand. "Listen to me," he continued, his voice breaking. 25 years ago, when Richard died, our firstborn, it wasn't an accident." The room tilted. My breath caught. Richard, my sweet laughing Richard, his body had been found in the gorge when he was just 20. They had told me he slipped. The police said it was misfortune in the dark. I had mourned him every day since, but I had believed. I had to believe. Now Henry's words cracked that belief in two. Damien pushed him. Henry whispered each word like a nail hammered into my heart. I saw it. I covered it up. I thought it was a mistake. I thought our youngest could change. But I was wrong, Hilda. God, forgive me, I was wrong. My chest rose and fell too fast. The monitors beeped louder, betraying my racing heart. A nurse rushed in, checking my vitals, and Henry squeezed my hand until the nurse left again. "Play weak," he hissed. "Our son doesn't know we survived. If he learns the truth too soon, he'll finish what he started." I closed my eyes again, forcing stillness, though every nerve in me screamed to rage, to sob, to demand answers. But I understood now, silence wasn't weakness. Silence was survival. If you uncovered a secret like this, your child murdering his own brother, would you have stayed silent or spoken out? Subscribe to Voices of Family Betrayal for the rest of this shocking truth. The hours in that hospital bed blurred together, machines humming, nurses moving like shadows, but inside me a storm raged. Every breath carried the echo of Henry's confession. My youngest son Damien had not only tried to kill me, he had killed his brother. I wanted to scream, to rip the IV from my arm and run into the street to tell the world. But I lay still, pretending weakness because Henry was right. Silence was the only shield we had left. That night, while the ward grew quiet, Henry leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of iron and pain. "There's more," he whispered. Damien has debts. His carpentry shop isn't thriving like he says. He owes dangerous men more than $100,000. Killing us isn't just about inheritance, it's his only way out. The words settled over me like a burial shroud. Suddenly, every forced smile, every casual question about our bank accounts, every suggestion that we should sell the house, they weren't care. They were calculations. My death had a price tag. I stared at the ceiling, my soul heavier than the cast on my arm, when the phone on the bedside table buzzed. Henry answered weakly, pressing it to his ear. His lips tightened as he listened. When he hung up, his eyes were pools of dread. "It was Damien," he said, voice barely audible. "He wants to take us hiking. Next weekend. Up in the mountains. A family outing, he called it." The words slashed through the air like knives. A mountain hike, a cliff, a perfect accident. I felt my stomach twist, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Henry," I whispered, "that's our funeral invitation." He nodded grimly, his face pale beneath the bandages. "Yes. He wants to finish what he started. He thinks no one will question a fall in the wilderness." We held hands in that cold hospital room, two old souls staring into the abyss together. There was terror in Henry's eyes, but also something else, a spark. "We'll go," he said, finally jaw set. "But this time we'll be ready. We'll gather proof. If we survive, Damien won't just be our shameful secret. He'll be the world's monster." Outside, the night wind rattled against the hospital windows, carrying with it the whisper of the cliffs. The place my son had chosen for my grave was calling, and I knew. Our fight had only begun. If your own child invited you on a trip, knowing it was meant to be your last, would you go or would you run? Don't miss the next part of this story. Subscribe to Voices of Family Betrayal and stay with me until the end. The days after Damien's phone call stretched like shadows across my soul. Every sunrise felt like a countdown to the end of my life. The hospital discharged us with casts, bandages, and prescriptions, but no medicine could numb the truth that festered inside me. My son wanted me dead. At home, the house I once loved became a stage for paranoia. Every creak in the wooden floor, every ring of the phone made me jump. I clung to Henry's side like a lifeline, whispering questions neither of us could answer. Should we tell the police? Should we run? Or should we walk into the trap and gather proof? Henry's voice carried the weight of a man who had lived too long with secrets. "We go," he said. "If we stay, he'll find another way." A fire, a robbery, an accident. Out there on that mountain, at least we know what's coming. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we could fight this monster who wore our son's face. But every time I looked at Henry's trembling hands, every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, gray hair, bruised skin, weary eyes, I wondered if we had the strength left to survive. On Wednesday, Melissa arrived at our doorstep with a smile that could have fooled anyone who didn't know the truth. She carried a shopping bag and breezed into my kitchen as if it were her own. "Surprise, Mom," she chirped, her voice sugar-sweet. "I brought snacks for our mountain picnic. Homemade cookies, fruit water. We'll be so prepared." Her hands caressed the counter, the very counter where I had prepared birthday cakes for her children, the grandchildren I loved more than my own breath. Now those same hands had pushed me toward my grave. She pulled out a new camera, gleaming and expensive. "I can't wait to capture the memories. These photos will be treasures forever." I forced a smile, my stomach turning. The only photos she wanted were of our broken bodies at the bottom of a gorge. Henry appeared in the doorway, leaning on his cane, and Melissa rushed to hug him. "Dad, you look so much better. This trip will be wonderful for you both. Fresh air, sunshine, it's just what you need." Her words dripped with poison wrapped in honey. And in her eyes, for a flicker of a second, I saw it, the cold glint of calculation. What would you do if someone smiled in your face while planning your death? Stay with me. The truth is only getting darker. Not long after Melissa finished her performance in my kitchen, the front door creaked open. Damien stepped inside, his voice carrying the cheerfulness of a man who had nothing to hide. "Mom, Dad," he called out, "ready for our big adventure." I froze at the sound of his footsteps. Once that voice had been my comfort, the sweet sound of my boy returning home from school. Now it was the voice of a predator entering his prey's den. He set a brand new hiking backpack on the table with a heavy thud. "Got everything we need," he said proudly, pulling items out one by one like a magician revealing tricks. Ropes, harnesses, lanterns, even a flare gun. "Safety first, right?" Henry and I exchanged a look, the kind that carried 100 unspoken words. Safety? No. These were tools for murder disguised as protection. I forced my lips into a faint smile. "That's thoughtful, Damien. He grinned, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Of course, Mom. We want to take care of you. It's going to be the perfect family day." The word perfect hung in the air like smoke. Melissa opened the box of cookies she had brought earlier, urging me to taste one. My throat closed. I imagined them laced with poison, another easy way to rid themselves of us. I declined, blaming my still weak stomach, and her smile tightened. Damien leaned against the counter, arms folded, studying us as if he were measuring how fragile we had become. "The trail we picked is simple," he explained, his tone casual. "Even kids could hike it. Nothing dangerous at all." My blood chilled. Nothing dangerous for them. For us, it would be the final step. Henry coughed softly and asked, "Are you sure we should go, with our injuries?" Damien's expression hardened for a flash, then softened again. "That's why Melissa and I will help every step. We'll be right there if anything happens. Anything." The word sliced deeper than a knife. When they finally left, their laughter echoing down the hallway, Henry and I sat in silence at the kitchen table. His hand found mine, cold and trembling. "He's planning it down to the last detail," Henry whispered. "The ropes, the trail, even the excuse of helping us if we fall. Hilda, we're walking straight into our own execution." I stared at the withering flowers on the counter, flowers Damien had brought me just a week before, once symbols of love, now reminders that death was being gift-wrapped by my own son. Would you still go on that trip knowing it was a trap, or would you run? "Stay with me, the darkest moment is yet to come." That night the house felt heavier than it ever had. The ticking clock in the hallway thudded like a drumbeat, counting down to doom. I moved from room to room in silence, brushing my fingertips along the furniture. Henry had built the photographs of birthdays and weddings, the walls that had once held laughter. Every corner whispered the same question: would this be the last time I saw any of it? Henry sat at his desk, papers spread out before him. His hands shook as he wrote, the ink smearing slightly. "It's a letter," he told me, voice hoarse. "For Harriet. If we don't come back, she'll know everything about Richard, about Damien, about tomorrow." I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting back tears. My husband, the man who had built our family with steady hands and quiet faith, was writing our final testament in ink and desperation. He folded the envelope carefully and slid it beneath the drawer where we kept our passports. Then he turned to me with eyes I will never forget. "Hilda, if something happens out there, if one of us falls, I need you to promise me you'll fight. Promise me you won't give in." My throat burned, but I nodded. "I'll fight, Henry. For Richard. For us." We climbed into bed, but sleep never came. We lay side by side in the darkness, fingers entwined, whispering fragments of a life we feared was ending. Memories of summer evenings, of Richard's laugh, of the first time we held Damien as a baby. I wanted to freeze those moments, to tattoo them into my soul before the morning tore them away. At dawn, the sky was cruelly beautiful. Pale pink clouds drifted lazily above, mocking our dread. Damien arrived, whistling, his voice cheerful as if he were picking us up for a picnic. Melissa followed, radiant in her hiking gear, camera swinging from her neck. "Ready, Mom, Dad?" Damien asked, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Henry squeezed my hand once hard. His eyes told me everything. "This is it." I forced my lips into a trembling smile. "Yes, son," I said softly. "We're ready." And as I stepped out the door, I knew I wasn't walking into a family outing. I was walking into an execution, and I prayed I'd have the strength to walk back out alive. If you knew tomorrow could be your last day, what would you do tonight? Subscribe to Voices of Family Betrayal to stay with me through every twist. The car ride to the mountains lasted only 2 hours, but to me it stretched like a lifetime. I sat in the back seat beside Henry, my hand gripping his so tightly our knuckles turned white. In the front, Damien drove with the calm of a man who believed his plan was flawless. Melissa hummed along to a cheerful tune on the radio, her voice bright, her smile wide, as if she were leading a school trip instead of an execution. I stared out the window, watching the countryside blur past. The golden fields, the clusters of trees, the distant peaks rising like jagged teeth, all of it should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a painting of my own funeral. Henry leaned close, his voice low. "The phone is recording," he whispered. Hidden inside his jacket pocket, his old cell phone had been switched on before we left. Every laugh, every false word, every slip of their plan, it would all be captured. If we didn't survive, maybe the truth would. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, Melissa clapped her hands with excitement. "Look at this place, isn't it perfect?" she gushed, pulling out her camera to snap photos of the towering trees and the ribbon of river that wound its way below. Perfect. The word made bile rise in my throat. Damien handed Henry one of the hiking poles he had bought. "Here, Dad. This will help with the climb. Don't worry, I'll be right behind you." His tone was warm, even gentle, but I heard the menace threaded through it. Behind us, that was where he wanted to be, the position of control, the position of a predator waiting for its prey to stumble. We started walking. The trail wound through thick forest sunlight, breaking through the branches in golden shards. Birds chirped overhead, but their songs felt like mockery. My lungs burned after only a few minutes, my body still weak from the hospital, and Henry struggled even more. Damien's voice floated from behind us, full of false concern. "Take your time, Mom. Dad, we're in no rush." But I heard the impatience beneath the mask. He needed us tired, worn down, defenseless. And he knew exactly how much longer we could last. Each step forward wasn't just a hike. It was a march toward the edge of the world. Would you keep walking, knowing each step brought you closer to death? Stay with me, the climb has only begun. The trail steepened as we moved deeper into the forest. Roots curled like twisted fingers across the path, and loose stones slipped under our feet. My legs ached, my lungs begged for air, but I forced myself onward. If I stopped, I knew Damien would see it not as weakness, but as opportunity. Melissa walked ahead of us, her camera clicking constantly. "Oh, look at those wildflowers," she exclaimed, pointing at a patch of yellow blooms bursting through the rocks. "And that bird so rare you have to see it." Her laughter rang through the trees, bright and false like a stage actress, overplaying her role. She posed Henry and me for photos, forcing us to smile with the valley in the background. Each flash felt like a countdown, a portrait for our obituaries. Behind us, Damien trailed at a steady pace. His steps were too controlled, too measured. I felt his eyes boring into my back, studying the angle of the ground, the slope of the hill, the distance to the drop. When I glanced over my shoulder, his smile came instantly, but not his eyes. His eyes were hollow, calculating, already imagining the moment I slipped into eternity. "Are you doing okay, Mom?" he asked sweetly. "Do you need me to hold your arm?" I wanted to scream, "Don't you dare touch me." But instead I whispered, "I'm fine." Henry stumbled on a loose rock, catching himself against a tree. Damien rushed forward too quickly, his hands reaching. For a flash of a second, his face hardened, the mask slipping. His grip wasn't to steady Henry. It was too forceful, too eager, as if testing how easy it would be to push. Melissa's voice broke the moment. "Careful, Dad," she chirped, snapping another photo. "We don't want you getting hurt before the view. The view!" My stomach twisted. I remembered Damien's words in the car. "There's a lookout point. The view is spectacular." Now I understood. He wasn't talking about scenery. He was talking about a stage. We continued upward, the trees thinning the air, sharpening. The trail narrowed, clinging to the mountainside like a scar. To my right, the earth fell away into a sheer drop. One misstep, one push, and it would all be over. I gripped Henry's hand tighter, my nails digging into his skin. We had to survive this climb. Because at the top waited not beauty but betrayal carved into stone. "Would you smile for a photo if you knew it might be your last? Stay with me, the cliff is waiting." The trees began to thin, and the forest opened into a clearing. Before us loomed a narrow path of jagged stone leading to a cliff that jutted over the valley. The wind screamed across it, carrying the smell of pine and the faint roar of the river below. Melissa gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, look at this. The view is incredible. We have to take photos here." My blood froze. This wasn't the official lookout on the map. This was closer, more dangerous. The path to the cliff was lined with loose gravel, the kind that slid beneath your shoes with the slightest pressure. It was the perfect stage for an accident. Damien set his backpack down with deliberate care. "Yes, this is perfect," he said, scanning the edge, measuring distances with his eyes. "Come on, Mom, Dad. Just a few steps more. The photos will be unforgettable. Unforgettable for a funeral slideshow." Henry's hand squeezed mine, a silent plea. "Stay calm. Play along." Melissa skipped ahead, her boots crunching over the gravel, her camera swinging like a pendulum. "Stand right here," she chirped, pointing to a spot dangerously close to the precipice. "If you hug, the whole valley will be in the background. It'll be beautiful." I forced my legs to move, each step heavier than the last. The ground tilted slightly, and I felt my balance shift. My heart pounded so loud I feared Damien could hear it. "Smile," Melissa urged, raising the camera. Her eyes gleamed, not with warmth but with hunger. Behind us, Damien adjusted his stance, his body angled closer, his shadow stretching over me. For the briefest moment, the mask fell completely. His face twisted into something cold, alien, an expression no mother should ever see on her child. Henry leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "The phone is recording," he whispered. "Whatever happens, don't look away." Melissa lifted the camera, her voice no longer sweet. "One more step back. Just a little. The picture will be perfect." The abyss yawned behind us, endless and merciless. I felt Damien's hand brush my shoulder, gentle at first, then firmer. The same touch I had felt before, the touch that had already cast me once into the void. This time I knew he meant to finish it. If you were standing at the edge, knowing your own child was about to push, what would you do? Don't miss the next part. Subscribe to Voices of Family Betrayal and stay with me until the truth unfolds. The wind at the cliff's edge howled like a chorus of ghosts. My feet shifted on the loose gravel, every pebble sliding closer to the abyss. Henry stood beside me, chest heaving, his hand gripping mine like a lifeline. In front of us, Melissa raised her camera, her smile stretched too wide, too brittle. "Perfect," she said softly. "Now, just one more step back." Her voice was sugar and venom. I saw the hunger in her eyes, the same hunger that had hollowed out my son. Damien moved closer behind me, his presence pressing against my back. I felt his breath warm on my neck, and I knew this was the moment. I forced myself to meet Melissa's gaze, and in that split second the mask dropped. Her eyes turned sharp, her lips curled in triumph. No more pretense, no more charade. "Smile," she ordered. Damien's hand settled on my shoulder. The same hand that had once held mine when he was a boy learning to walk. The same hand that had painted me pictures in kindergarten. Now it trembled with anticipation, not of love, but of power. Now Melissa hissed. Damien shoved. The world tilted violently. My stomach lurched as the ground vanished beneath me. Henry screamed, his voice swallowed by the roar of the valley. For an instant I was weightless, floating between life and death. But Henry wasn't finished. With a strength born of desperation, he twisted, grabbing Damien's wrist as he fell. "If we die," Henry roared, "you're coming with us." The scene exploded into chaos. Damien stumbled forward, his eyes wide with shock. Melissa dropped the camera, her scream slicing through the air as she lunged to pull him back. The four of us tangled together, a grotesque knot of bodies teetering on the brink. The cliff crumbled beneath our weight. Pebbles and dust cascaded into the void. My fingernails scraped against stone, searching for an anchor that didn't exist. And then gravity won. We plunged together, locked in a macabre embrace, our screams echoing off the rock walls as the valley rushed up to meet us. Wind tore at my hair, ripped the sound from my throat, burned my skin raw. Time fractured, each heartbeat stretched into eternity, each memory flashing like lightning. Richard's smile, Sunday dinners, birthdays, lullabies. This was how it would end. Betrayal, bone and blood dashed against stone. If you were falling with your betrayers, would you fight to take them with you or pray to survive? Stay with me. The impact was only the beginning. The fall felt endless. Wind clawed at my face, tearing the scream from my throat before it could form. Damien's body tangled with Henry's. Melissa's nails raked my arm as she shrieked. For a breathless moment we were four shadows spinning through the void, a grotesque knot of blood and betrayal plummeting into darkness. Then the ground struck. The world exploded in pain. My body slammed against rock bones, splintering with sickening cracks. White-hot fire shot through my leg, my ribs caved beneath the force. My head snapped sideways and the taste of iron filled my mouth. The air was torn from my lungs, leaving me gasping in silence. I lay twisted against the jagged stones, staring at the sky as it spun above me. The world blurred blue, gray, red until all I could feel was agony flooding every nerve. Somewhere to my left, Melissa groaned, her voice raw. "Damien, my leg. I think it's broken." A guttural sound answered her, a mixture of pain and rage. "We'll crawl. We have to crawl. Check the old ones. Are they breathing?" I shut my eyes quickly, willing my chest to still, my breath to vanish. But panic thundered inside me, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to betray me. Then through the haze I heard Henry's voice, weak, shattered, but steady. His lips brushed my ear so close only I could hear. "Hilda," he whispered. "Don't move. Pretend we're dead." The words anchored me like iron chains. I forced my body into stillness, clamping down on every instinct to cough, to cry, to scream from the unbearable pain. A shadow fell over me. Damien. His breath rattled, labored, but his voice carried a cruel certainty. "They're gone. Both of them. Eyes open, no breath. It worked. Worked. Melissa let out a bitter laugh that scraped the air like broken glass. Finally. We don't have to pretend anymore. Her words twisted through me worse than the pain in my shattered bones. I wanted to lunge at her to rip the mask from her face, but I stayed frozen, Henry's warning burning in my ears. Above us, vultures circled lazily in the sky, their dark wings slicing the light. My son thought I was already carrying a corpse waiting to be picked apart. And for now, that lie was the only thing keeping me alive. Melissa's bitter laugh still echoed in the gorge. Her voice, sharp and cold, carried no trace of the daughter-in-law I once welcomed into my home. "At least now we don't have to play the devoted children anymore," she muttered. Damien groaned as he dragged himself across the rocks, his breath ragged. "We'll stick to the story." They slipped. "We tried to help, but we fell too." "Everyone will believe it." Their words cut deeper than the jagged stone beneath me. They were already rehearsing our deaths, stitching together a tapestry of lies to feed the world. "Make sure you remember it exactly," Damien ordered. A loose rock. Dad tried to grab Mom. We reached for them, but it was too late. That's what happened. Melissa coughed, her voice trembling with pain, though her cruelty remained intact. "We've practiced it enough, Damien. We'll be the survivors, poor children mourning their tragic loss. The inheritance will be ours sooner than we thought." A silence followed, broken only by the scrape of their bodies dragging themselves away from us. I forced my chest, still fighting the instinct to gasp as their shadows passed over me one last time. "They're dead," Damien whispered, certainty in his tone. "Both of them. We just need help to make it look clean." Their voices grew fainter as they crawled toward the edge of the gorge, searching for a place to climb, a signal to call for rescue. I dared not open my eyes, but I could hear every scrape, every moan fading into the distance. When at last silence fell, Henry shifted beside me, his breath shallow but steady. "We're alive," he rasped. "Badly hurt, but alive." Tears welled behind my closed lids, hot against the dirt and blood streaking my face. I wanted to sob, to scream, but I forced it down. Alive. For now, that had to be enough. Above us, the vultures circled lower, as if they too sensed the end was near. The gorge became a tomb, and the only way out was to keep wearing the mask of death a little longer. The gorge grew silent once Damien and Melissa's voices faded into the distance. Only the wind remained whistling through the rocks like the breath of ghosts. My body screamed with every heartbeat, bones grinding, skin slick with blood. I wanted to move, to sit up, to scream at the heavens, but Henry's warning chained me still. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, his hand twitched against mine. Weak, trembling, but alive. "Hilda." His voice was ragged, barely more than air. "We need to talk, while we still can." I turned my head slightly, the effort sending fire down my spine. "Save your strength," I whispered. "No," he rasped, eyes clouded with pain and guilt. "There are things you don't know. Things I should have told you years ago." Dread tightened in my chest. "Not now," I begged. "Please, Henry." But he shook his head slowly, blood dripping from a cut at his temple. "Richard's death. It wasn't what you thought." My world tilted again, worse than the fall. Richard, my firstborn, my sunshine boy, who died at 20, his body found broken at the bottom of a gorge. The police called it an accident. I buried him, believing fate was cruel, not my family. I gritted my teeth. "Don't say it, Henry." He closed his eyes, a tear leaking out. "I saw them, Hilda, Richard and Damien. They were fighting. Richard had found out Damien was stealing from us. He had proof. He threatened to tell you to tell me." His voice cracked. Damien snapped. He pushed him. The words shattered me more than any broken bone. My stomach lurched. "No, no." "I tried to believe it was an accident," Henry whispered. "Damien begged me," said Richard, tripped, "that it wasn't his fault. But I knew. I knew the truth. And I buried it. For 25 years I carried that lie." Tears blurred my vision, mixing with the dirt and blood on my cheeks. My own husband had hidden the fact that one son murdered the other. My family had been built on lies, and now those lies had come crashing down around us. Above us, a faint sound stirred the air, the distant hum of rotors. A helicopter. Henry's grip tightened weakly. "They're bringing help," he whispered. And with it, danger. Henry's breath rattled, each word costing him more strength than I wanted him to spend. Yet his eyes locked onto mine, pleading. "I have to tell you all of it, Hilda. Before someone else buries the truth again." The gorge seemed to darken around us as he spoke. "That night, 25 years ago, I followed Richard. He stormed out of the house with papers in his hand. Bank statements. Proof, Damien had been stealing from our savings for months. I knew Richard's temper and I feared what might happen. My pulse hammered, every word slicing into me. When I reached the gorge, Henry continued, his voice breaking. I saw them screaming at each other. Richard called him a thief, a liar. Damien shouted back, saying he was tired of being the shadow, tired of Richard being the favorite. Then, Henry's eyes clouded. Damien shoved him. Hard. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. I watched our son push his own brother into the darkness. The rocks beneath me seemed to tremble. The air grew too thin to breathe. I wanted to scream, to claw the sky apart. My Damien, my child, had blood on his hands long before he tried to spill mine. Henry's voice shook as he went on. Richard clawed at the air, trying to hold on. Then he was gone. When I reached Damien, he was sobbing, begging me to believe him. He said Richard tripped, that it wasn't his fault. And I chose to believe. Because he was my only son left. I turned my face away, tears burning through the dirt on my skin. You let me bury Richard thinking it was God's will, when it was murder. I was weak, Henry choked. And every day since I've carried that weakness. Now you know why Damien is who he is. He's been a murderer from the start. Above us, the hum of the helicopter grew louder, chopping the air with urgency. Loose stones rattled down from the cliff as search crews began to gather above. Voices floated down, rescuers' ropes, clinking men shouting orders. I stiffened, panic flooding me. Henry, if they find us alive too soon, they'll finish the job, Henry said grimly. Damien and Melissa will make sure of it. We lay motionless, broken bodies disguised as corpses while salvation and doom descended on the same rope. The clinking of carabiners echoed down the gorge, followed by the metallic scrape of ropes sliding against stone. Flashlights cut thin beams through the shadows, their glow moving closer with each breath. 2 survivors down here, a man's voice called from above. We're bringing them up, my pulse thundered. Survivors. That meant Damien and Melissa had reached the rescuers, first playing their parts to perfection. If those ropes touched me now, if anyone realized I was alive too soon, my son would find a way to silence me for good. Henry squeezed my hand weakly, his eyes blazing with the last flicker of strength. Stay still, Hilda. No matter what. They can't know yet. The beam of a flashlight swept across my face. A rescuer crouched beside me, his breath hot with urgency. Fingers pressed against my neck, searching for a pulse. I forced my body to stillness, letting my breath slip into shallow whispers, almost invisible. She's faint, the rescuer muttered. Almost gone. Get a stretcher down here. Beside me, Henry let out a moan so low I almost mistook it for the wind. The medic bent over him, pressing an oxygen mask to his lips. Critical, but alive. Move fast. Above us, Melissa's sobs pierced the air, perfectly rehearsed. It all happened so fast. We tried to save them. Her performance might have fooled the world, but not me. Not anymore. Damien's voice followed, dripping with false grief. My parents. My poor parents. He almost sounded convincing, almost. The rescuers prepared us for evacuation straps tightening across my chest, securing my shattered body to the stretcher. I let my eyelids flutter just enough to glimpse Henry beside me. His gaze caught mine, fierce despite the pain. Not yet. Not here. The rope groaned as the stretcher lifted, carrying me away from the jagged stones toward the edge of the cliff. The sky opened above, vast and merciless. Every inch upward was a battle between life and death, between truth and the lies my son had spun. I closed my eyes again, clinging to one thought: I would not die his victim. If I had to crawl through fire and bone, I would rise. And when I did, Damien would finally face the truth he had buried for 25 years. The hospital swallowed me in light and chaos. Fluorescent bulbs hummed above, nurses shouted codes I didn't understand, and the wheeled stretcher rattled beneath me as they pushed me through swinging doors. I wanted to open my eyes wide to scream the truth into the sterile air, but Henry's last warning held me steady. Pretend. So I kept still, my body limp, my breath shallow. To them, I was a fragile woman clinging to life. To me, I was a soldier waiting for the enemy to slip. I could hear snippets of the doctor's voices. Pulses faint, possible fractures in the ribs and arm. She's critical but stable for now. The words were meant to reassure, but I didn't trust reassurance anymore. I trusted nothing but silence. Hours blurred into a haze of machines and footsteps. I remained motionless, letting my body sink into the performance of near death. Nurses whispered about miracles, about survival. And still I played the part. Then I heard them. Footsteps softer than the staff's voices I knew too well. Melissa's sobs pierced the air first, the kind that belonged on a theater stage. She looked so pale, she whispered, forcing tremor into her tone. Like a ghost already. Damien followed his hand, brushing mine. I nearly recoiled, but I stayed limp. His breath tickled my ear as he leaned close. "Mom," he murmured, "if you can hear me, I'm sorry." For a heartbeat, I almost believed him. Almost. Then his voice dropped lower, slick with venom. "You should have stopped asking questions about Richard. About the money. Some truths are better left buried. Just like him." The air froze in my lungs. He had said Richard's name. He had tied his brother's death to money, to secrets, to his own hand, and he thought I couldn't hear it. But someone else did. A shadow shifted at the end of the bed. The nurse adjusting my IV had paused mid-motion, her eyes wide, her lips parted in shock. She had heard. Damien straightened quickly, clearing his throat, masking the slip with a softer tone. "We'll never forget you, Mom." But it was too late. His confession had already spilled into the air, and it hadn't fallen on deaf ears. The silence after Damien's whisper pressed heavier than the bandages binding my ribs. I kept my eyes closed, forcing stillness into every muscle, though my heart slammed against my chest so violently I feared the monitors would betray me. At the foot of my bed, the nurse lingered. I could feel her hesitation in the air, her breath catching as if she wasn't sure whether to move or speak. She had heard him. I knew it. And now so did he. Melissa's voice broke the moment, soft and syrupy. "She's gone already, Damien. Look at her, barely alive. Stop torturing yourself. Torturing himself." The words almost made me laugh if laughter hadn't threatened to splinter my ribs. My son wasn't tortured, he was triumphant. He thought he had erased me just as he had erased Richard. Damien patted my hand one last time, the gesture tender to any witness, poisonous to me. "Rest well, Mom," he murmured, then stepped back. The door opened. Their footsteps receded down the hallway, Melissa's sobs fading like rehearsed lines exiting a stage. The nurse remained. I dared to open my eyelids, the slightest fraction enough to glimpse her face in the glow of the monitor. She looked pale, stunned. Her eyes darted from the hallway to me, then back again, as though debating whether she had truly heard what she thought she had. Slowly she leaned closer, pretending to adjust the IV line. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Ma'am, if you can hear me, move just a little." Every nerve in my body screamed to respond, but fear tangled me tighter than the sheets. If she was wrong, if Damien lingered nearby, one slip could cost me my life. Then I remembered Henry's grip, his voice telling me to fight. With all the strength left in me, I curled my index finger once against the sheet. The nurse gasped softly. Her eyes widened. Then, almost too quietly to catch, she whispered, "Oh my God, you're alive." I repeated the motion 2-3 times, each movement like dragging stone with broken bones. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed determination, hardening her features. "Stay still. Keep pretending. I'll get the doctor." And the police. She slipped from the room, her steps hushed but hurried, leaving me once again alone beneath the sterile light, but not alone in the truth anymore. Minutes crawled by, each second heavier than the last. My body ached to move, to breathe deeply, to sob with relief, but I stayed limp, clinging to the role that was keeping me alive. Somewhere in the corridor, hurried footsteps echoed, sharper and more purposeful than the steady shuffle of nurses. The door creaked open. A new voice entered, lower, firm. "Detective Johnson, City Police. Nurse Innes says we may have a situation." I forced my eyelids to remain closed, but every nerve in me trembled with hope. A detective. Proof that someone finally believed. The doctor stepped closer to my bed, his tone calm but weighted. "Ma'am, if you can hear me, you're safe now. Move only if you understand." My finger twitched once against the sheet. A hush fell over the room. Then the detective's voice, quiet but edged with steel. "Good. Keep pretending until we say otherwise. We're going to protect you, but we'll need your testimony when you're ready." For the first time since the cliff, I let myself draw in a fuller breath. Not too much, just enough to know the tide was shifting. Across the room another stretcher rattled. "Henry." He groaned, his eyelids fluttering. The doctor hurried to his side. "He's coming around." Weak but responsive. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him the nightmare was finally unraveling, but I stayed still. His voice rasped out anyway, hoarse and broken. "The phone, my jacket, recording, everything." The detective bent quickly, retrieving the device. His eyes flickered with satisfaction as he slipped it into his coat. "We'll take care of it. This may be exactly what we need." Beyond the door I could hear them. Damien and Melissa still in the waiting room, still wearing their masks of grief, still performing. They had no idea their stage was about to collapse. I closed my eyes tighter, letting the machines beep their steady rhythm. For the first time in days, a spark of strength flickered in my chest. The noose my son had tied for me was loosening. Soon it would slip around his own neck. If you were lying in that hospital bed, would you keep pretending or open your eyes and confront the monsters yourself? The hospital room was dim, the blinds drawn against the morning Sunday. Machines hummed, monitors blinked, and the faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. I lay perfectly still. My breaths measured my body, a canvas of pain hidden beneath white sheets. Then, the door opened. Melissa's voice floated in first thick with feigned sorrow. "Poor Mom, poor Dad. They look so fragile." Her footsteps padded closer, the click of her camera hanging from her neck, faint but distinct. She wanted proof of her grief to parade later, another prop for their performance. Damien followed his shoes, striking the floor with heavier certainty. He came to my bedside, his hand brushing mine like he had done before. "They won't last the night," he muttered, voice too low for anyone else, so he thought. "Good. One more push and it'll all be over." I forced myself not to flinch, not to recoil from the venom in his touch. Melissa sighed loudly, louder than necessary. "We'll need to start planning the funeral. It has to look proper, Damien. Respectable. People will pity us more that way." His reply was sharper. "We'll take the inheritance first, then we'll worry about pity." Behind the curtain, unseen, I heard the faintest rustle. The detective, the nurse. They were listening, recording, waiting. Melissa leaned down, her lips near my ear, her whisper poisoned honey. "You were such a burden, Mom. Always clinging, always watching. But soon you'll be quiet forever." Her words burned hotter than the pain in my shattered bones. "Shh," Damien hissed, glancing at the doorway. "Don't say too much. Too late." Every syllable hung in the air, caught by ears sharper than theirs. The detective's shadow shifted again. For the first time, I felt the balance tilt. The predator's mask was cracking, and the world beyond the curtain was finally seeing the monster beneath. I kept my eyes closed, heart steady. This was no longer just survival. This was the gathering of proof. The trap was tightening, and Damien didn't even know he was already inside it. Melissa's sobs grew louder, exaggerated, echoing off the sterile walls. She pressed a tissue to her eyes, but when she lowered it, not a single tear stained the paper. Her act might have fooled a stranger, but not me. Not now. Damien shifted by Henry's bed, his voice low, impatient. "Stop with the dramatics, Melissa. We don't need to convince them here. We need to convince the world out there." Her head snapped toward him, her whisper sharp as broken glass. "And what if the doctors suspect? What if they live longer than we planned?" The words sliced into me, but I remained still, every breath a battle to keep the mask of death in place. Damien leaned closer to her, his tone rising just enough for the hidden ears in the room to catch. "They won't. Look at them, they're barely breathing. Even if the old man survives, the fall broke him. He won't last." And his hand brushed my arm, the weight of it like a brand. "She's as good as gone." Melissa's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You said the same thing about Richard." Silence. The air in the room thickened, colder than ice. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. She had said his name. Damien's reply came clipped, furious. "Don't you dare bring that up here." Her voice quivered, but she pushed on, unable to stop herself. "You swore it was an accident. But you told me once in the dark you pushed him, just like you pushed them." The detective's pen scratched faintly behind the curtain. Evidence. Every poisonous word captured. Damien's breath hissed through his teeth. "Keep your mouth shut, Melissa. If anyone ever heard you—" She cut him off, her whisper seething. "Don't threaten me. Without me, you'd have been caught years ago. I kept your secret, I built your alibi, I planned this trip. You needed me as much as I needed you." Their voices tangled anger, unraveling the careful mask they had worn for weeks. The act of grieving children slipped into raw confession, every phrase a nail in their own coffin. I lay frozen pain screaming through me, but beneath it a new fire flickered. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. The monsters thought I was dead, but the truth was alive, breathing through every careless word they spoke. The air inside that hospital room grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Damien and Melissa's whispers tangled into snarls, two snakes coiling tighter around each other, both too blinded by rage to realize the walls were closing in. Melissa jabbed a finger toward me, though I kept my eyes closed. If she wakes Damien, if she says one word, everything collapses. Richard, the money, the cliff, all of it. His reply was a growl, low and venomous. She won't wake. And if by some miracle she does, we'll make sure she never speaks again. My blood turned to ice. Behind the curtain I heard it, the faint shuffle of boots, the click of a pen shutting, the quiet rustle of a coat. The detective was ready. The trap had been sprung. Damien straightened, pulling Melissa by the wrist. "Come on! We've said too much already. Let's get out before the curtain swished aside." Detective Johnson stepped into the room, his face calm but his eyes sharp as blades. Behind him stood two uniformed officers, their hands resting on their belts. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. Melissa froze, her mouth falling open. Damien's eyes darted to me, to Henry, then back to the detective. For the first time I saw fear flicker there, the predator realizing the prey wasn't alone. What is this?" Damien stammered. "We're just visiting our parents." The detective lifted a small device from his pocket, its red light blinking steadily. "Funny," he said softly, "because I've been listening to every word you just said." Melissa's sob cracked, no longer staged but real. Damien's face drained of color. I kept still, letting my chest rise shallowly, hiding the fire inside me. Justice wasn't complete yet, but I could feel it. Its footsteps were already in the room. The mask was falling, and once it shattered, the world would see them for what they truly were. The silence after the detective's words was thicker than the antiseptic air. Damien stood frozen, his hand still gripping Melissa's wrist. His jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling like a caged animal. Melissa trembled beside him, her mask of grief torn away, her eyes darting between the officers and the blinking recorder. You can't use that," Damien stammered finally. "We were just upset. People say things when they're grieving." Detective Johnson's gaze didn't waver. "Grieving children don't confess to pushing their brother off a gorge. They don't talk about inheritance. They don't plot their parents' funeral while standing over their beds." Melissa's knees buckled and she collapsed into the chair by the wall, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs this time were jagged, uncontrolled. Damien glared at her, his voice a sharp whisper. "Shut up. Don't say a word." The officers stepped forward. One rested his hand on Damien's shoulder. "Sir, you'll need to come with us." Damien jerked away violently, his voice cracking. "You think you know everything. You don't know what they put me through. Always, Richard, always the golden boy, while I—" He stopped himself, breath ragged, realizing too late that every word was rope tightening around his own neck. The detective tilted his head. "Go on. While you're at it, tell us again how you helped your parents on that cliff." Damien's face twisted, rage battling fear. For the first time he looked less like my son and more like the man he had become, driven by greed, corroded by envy, hollowed out by lies. I had listened long enough. With a slow, trembling effort, I let my eyelids flutter open. Light stabbed my eyes, but I forced them wide, staring straight at the man who had tried to bury me twice. The room stilled. Melissa gasped, her sobs cutting off like a snapped string. Damien's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a man watching a ghost rise from its grave. My voice was hoarse, broken, but it carried through the silence. "You should have made sure I was truly dead, Damien." The words dropped like stones into the room, and in that instant the mask shattered completely. Damien staggered back, his face drained as if he'd seen a specter crawl out of the grave. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't possible. You were gone. You!" His voice cracked, breaking apart like glass under weight. Melissa pressed herself against the wall, her sobs turning into gasps of terror. "Damien, she's alive. She heard us. She heard everything." The detective's pen clicked shut with finality. "And so did we," he said, his voice steady, hard. Henry groaned from the next bed, turning his head weakly. His eyes opened, sunken but fierce, locking onto our son. "I told you, Damien," he rasped. "The truth always climbs back up, even from the bottom of a gorge." Damien's breathing quickened. His gaze darted to the door, to the officers, to me, calculating, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Sweat slicked his forehead. "You don't understand," he shouted suddenly, his voice cracking. "Everything I did, everything was because of you. You always loved Richard more. You never saw me. You left me in his shadow." His confession spilled out in rage, venom twisting into desperation. Each word another nail hammered into his coffin. Melissa shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Don't drag me down with you, Damien. This was your obsession, not mine. I just wanted to keep the family together." The lie faltered in her throat. She looked toward the detective, eyes wide as if begging for a deal for some path out of the darkness she had chosen. Damien turned on her, his face contorted, spit flying as he roared, "You planned it with me. Every detail, you tied the ropes, you packed the bag, you told me when to push." Her sobs collapsed into silence, guilt cutting deeper than fear. For the first time, she couldn't meet my eyes. The officers moved closer, their presence like closing walls. One reached for his cuffs, the metallic click slicing the tension. "That's enough." "Damien Carter, Melissa Carter, you're under arrest." Damien's chest heaved. His eyes darted again to me, the woman he had tried to erase. For a heartbeat, I thought he might lunge one final desperate act, but then his shoulders sagged, his fury curdling into defeat. The predator was cornered, and the mask was gone. The room pulsed with silence as the officers closed in. Metal cuffs gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. Damien's body tensed, his fists clenching as if he might fight, but the strength was gone. His bravado, his calculated cruelty, all of it drained from him, leaving only a trembling man cornered by truth. Melissa sank into the chair, her sobs weak and hollow now. She no longer reached for him. She no longer pretended. The officer seized Damien's arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. The metallic snap of the cuffs echoed like thunder in the small room. He flinched, his face twisted with rage, but there was no escape left. "For attempted murder of your parents and for the death of your brother, Richard Carter," Detective Johnson said firmly, "you are under arrest." The words hung heavy, final. Damien's eyes, dark and wild, turned toward me. For years I had dreamed of seeing regret in them, even a flicker of the boy I once held in my arms. But there was nothing, only fury, only the hollow shadow of a son I no longer recognized. I lifted my chin despite the pain coursing through my body. My voice was hoarse but steady. "You took Richard from me. You tried to take Henry. You tried to take me. But you will never take the truth." His jaw tightened, his lips trembling as the officers pulled him back. For the first time, Damien looked small, not as a monster, not as a man, but as a child undone by his own choices. Melissa's hands covered her face, muffling her sobs as the second officer placed cuffs on her wrists. She did not resist. Her mask had collapsed entirely. The door shut behind them with a hollow slam, leaving only the steady beeping of monitors and the ragged sound of my own breathing. I turned my head toward Henry. His hand found mine, weak but certain. For the first time in weeks, perhaps years, I felt something stir in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of justice. If you had to watch your own child taken away in handcuffs, would you feel sorrow for what was lost or relief for what was finally ended? The courthouse buzzed like a hive when we arrived. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and neighbors craned their necks from the steps. For weeks, rumors had spread an inheritance, a fall, whispers of betrayal. But no rumor could prepare them for the truth that was about to unfold. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Wooden benches overflowed with faces. I recognized church friends, neighbors from our street, even the grocer who had once given Damien candy as a boy. Their eyes followed me as Henry and I were wheeled to the front, our bodies still broken but our voices ready to rise. Damien sat at the defense table, his suit rumpled, his jaw clenched. Melissa was beside him, pale, her mascara-smudged hands trembling in her lap. They looked smaller than I remembered, not predators now, but caged animals, awaiting the verdict of the world. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Williams entered, his robe sweeping the floor like a shadow. He eyed us all with the gravity of a man who had seen too many tragedies, yet still carried the weight of each one. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Carter, rose first. Her voice cut through the murmur like a blade. "This case is about betrayal, the kind that shatters families, the kind that rots trust at its core. The evidence will show that Damien Carter, with the aid of his wife Melissa Carter, attempted to murder his parents by pushing them from a cliff. And this is not his first crime. 25 years ago, he took the life of his own brother, Richard Carter. Gasps rippled through the room, whispers spread like wildfire. Richard's name had not been spoken in public for decades. Now it was resurrected, heavy with truth. Damien shifted his face, darkening, his fist tightening against the table. Melissa buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. The prosecutor continued, calm but unyielding. "You will hear from witnesses. You will hear the recording found on Henry Carter's phone. You will hear the words of the nurse who overheard Damien's confession. And you will hear from the victims themselves who stand before you today alive despite every attempt to silence them. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, but I did not falter. For the first time, I was not just a mother mourning or a wife enduring. I was the voice of truth rising at last. The prosecutor pressed a button on the small speaker set before the jury. A low crackle filled the air, followed by Damien's voice, cold, unmistakable. "They won't last the night." "Good. One more push and it'll all be over." Gasps broke out across the benches. A woman near the back covered her mouth with both hands. The grocer shook his head in disbelief, whispering, "That boy." Damien slammed his fist against the table, his face twisted in fury. "That recording was taken out of context. I was upset, grieving. I didn't mean order." Judge Williams thundered, his gavel striking wood. The prosecutor didn't flinch. "Members of the jury, what you just heard was not grief. It was intent. It was admission." She raised Henry's battered phone high for the court to see. This device recorded everything. Their plan, their arguments, their confession about Richard's death. Murmurs rippled through the room like an unstoppable tide. Melissa's shoulders trembled. She stared down at her lap, unable to look at the crowd, the jury, or even her husband. When the prosecutor called the nurse to the stand, Melissa's mask cracked further. The nurse recounted in detail the whisper she heard by the bedside, the slip about Richard, the chilling words about inheritance. Her voice was steady, her testimony devastating. Damien shook his head violently, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's lying. They're all lying. This is a setup against me." The prosecutor let the words hang in the air before turning back to Melissa. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to maintain that this was all your husband's doing?" Melissa's lips quivered. Her hands twisted the tissue in her lap until it tore. Slowly she lifted her gaze, eyes wet, voice breaking. I never wanted it to go this far." Damien's head snapped toward her, his voice a hiss of rage. "Don't you dare." But Melissa spoke louder now, words spilling like water from a cracked dam. "It was his idea. He planned it all. I just went along. I thought he was bluffing. I thought he was angry, not serious. I didn't." Her voice broke into sobs. "I didn't think he'd really do it." The courtroom erupted in whispers, every spectator leaning closer. The mask had not just cracked, it had shattered, exposing the rot inside. And Damien knew it. Damien's chair screeched against the floor as he leapt to his feet, his face a storm of fury and desperation. "Liar," he roared at Melissa, his voice cracking through the courtroom. "You wanted it as much as I did." "Don't you dare pin this all on me," Melissa sobbed harder, her words tumbling over themselves. "I didn't push them. I didn't push Richard. You did, Damien. You pushed them all." The room erupted, reporters scribbling furiously, neighbors gasping, the jury wide-eyed at the spectacle. Judge Williams pounded his gavel, but the chaos only swelled as Damien's mask tore apart under the weight of his own rage. "You think I regret it," Damien bellowed, his voice echoing off the wooden walls. "Richard always looked down on me. They all did. And my parents, my so-called parents, never saw me for who I was. I was always second, always the shadow. So yes," his chest heaved, spit flying with every word. "I pushed him. I pushed them both. I'd do it again if I had the chance." Gasps sucked the air from the room. A neighbor in the gallery cried out, "Dear God." Melissa covered her face, collapsing into herself. The prosecutor stood frozen for only a moment, then turned to the jury with a calm, cutting voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the truth from his own lips." Damien's breath came in ragged bursts, his eyes wild as officers rushed forward. He fought, thrashing against their grip, but the cuffs clamped around his wrists with finality. "Get off me," he screamed, voice breaking. "They deserved it. They all deserved it." Judge Williams' gavel cracked like thunder. "Order in the court." Order, slowly silence, returned thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. Damien sagged in the officer's arms, his fury spent, his fate sealed. I sat straighter in my chair, pain flaring through my body but strength rising in my chest. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It had been dragged into the light, exposed for the world to see. For the first time since Richard's death, justice felt close enough to touch. If your child confessed before the whole world that they had tried to kill you, would your heart break with sorrow or harden with justice? The courtroom was silent after Damien's outburst, the weight of his confession pressing down like a storm cloud. No one dared to move. The jury stared wide-eyed, their pens frozen mid-note. Even the reporters seemed stunned, their hands hovering above their pads as if the words they had just heard were too heavy to write. Judge Williams cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the chaos. Let the record reflect that the defendant, Damian Carter, has admitted under oath and in open court to the murder of Richard Carter and the attempted murder of his parents, Henry and Hilda Carter. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Melissa sobbed quietly, her head bowed, mascara streaking her face. Damian sat slumped between the two officers, his eyes vacant, now drained of the fury that had consumed him. He looked like a hollowed man, not a son, not a husband, just a criminal waiting for his chains to tighten. The prosecutor stood again, her tone calm, cutting. Your Honor, the evidence speaks louder than any argument. The recording, the witness testimony, the victims themselves, and now the defendant's own confession. There can be no doubt. We ask for the maximum penalty allowed by law. The defense attorney rose, his shoulders heavy. His voice was tired, almost resigned. Your Honor, the defendant is clearly not of sound mind. We ask the court to consider psychological evaluation before sentencing. Judge Williams fixed him with a hard stare. Counselor, madness is no excuse for murder. Not when it spans decades. Not when it is deliberate. I sat motionless, my hands trembling in my lap. For years I had prayed for truth. For years I had buried Richard without answers. Now the truth was here, raw and brutal, yet strangely liberating. The judge turned to the jury. Members, you will now deliberate. Consider carefully, though I believe the path before you is clear. The jury filed out the wooden door, shutting behind them with a hollow thud. The room buzzed faintly with whispers, neighbors clutching each other, reporters scribbling again, officers shifting their weight as if bracing for what was to come. I glanced at Henry beside me. His eyes met mine, weary but shining with something I hadn't seen in years, hope. The wait was brief, but it felt like hours. My palms sweated against the wood of my wheelchair's armrests. Every tick of the courtroom clock echoed like a drumbeat in my skull. At last, the jury door opened. 12 solemn faces filed back into the room. Not one looked toward Damian, not one looked toward Melissa. Their eyes fixed forward, heavy with the gravity of the decision they carried. All rise, the bailiff commanded. Judge Williams nodded. Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? A middle-aged woman stood, her voice steady, though her hands shook with the paper she held. We have, Your Honor. The room held its breath. In the matter of the state versus Damian Carter on the charge of murder in the first degree regarding Richard Carter, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps swept through the benches. My vision blurred with tears, but I held them back, gripping Henry's hand with all the strength I had left. The foreperson continued, her tone unyielding. On the charge of attempted murder of Henry and Hilda Carter, we find the defendant guilty. The words landed like thunder, shaking the very air. Damian's head snapped up, his eyes wild. No, he bellowed, his voice breaking into a scream. You're all against me. They wanted me gone. They made me this way. He thrashed against the officer's grip, his body jerking, spit flying as his voice rose to a howl. I'll never rot in a cell. Do you hear me? Never. The gavel slammed hard. Order in the court, Judge Williams thundered. Melissa collapsed into sobs, sliding from her chair to the floor. I didn't push them, she wailed. I only wanted to help him. Please, Your Honor, I'm guilty of weakness, not murder, but no one in the room moved to comfort her. The neighbors who once welcomed her into their homes turned away. The friends she pretended to cherish now stared with disgust. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. Both of you have chosen your path. The jury has spoken. Sentencing will follow. Damian sagged in the officer's grip, his face twisted between rage and despair, while Melissa covered her face, her sobs smothered in her palms. For the first time, the burden I had carried for decades began to lift. The truth had finally spoken louder than lies. The gavel struck once more, silencing the last echoes of Damian's rage and Melissa's sobs. Judge Williams leaned forward, his expression carved in stone. Damian Carter, he intoned, for the murder of Richard Carter and the attempted murder of Henry and Hilda Carter, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The words fell like chains, final and unbreakable. Damian's body jerked as if struck. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes searched the room, wildly desperate for an ally, a savior, but found none. Not even Melissa. The judge's gaze shifted. Melissa Carter, for your role in aiding and abetting these crimes and for conspiring to conceal the truth, this court sentences you to 20 years in state prison. Melissa crumpled, her cries echoing off the high walls. Her pleas for mercy went unanswered. The officers pulled her to her feet, her wrists bound in iron. The courtroom murmured the weight of the moment pressing into every heart. Some neighbors shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered prayers. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already forming. Henry squeezed my hand, his grip weak but steady. I lifted my head, letting my eyes fall on the son who once called me Mom. There was no remorse left in his gaze, only emptiness, a hollow man swallowed by the choices he had made. As the officers led Damien and Melissa away, I felt no triumph, no joy, only sorrow heavy as stone. I had lost one son to murder and the other to his own sins. My family was shattered beyond repair. Yet in the rubble of that loss, something remained. Richard's voice, silenced for decades, had been heard at last. Justice, though late, had finally found its way through the cracks of lies. I turned to the jury, to the neighbors, to the world that had watched this trial unfold. My voice trembled, but I spoke. Family should be love. But when love is twisted by greed, by envy, it becomes the sharpest knife. We survived not because we were strong, but because the truth refused to die. The courtroom fell silent, every ear holding on to the words. If betrayal lived in your own bloodline, would you still call it family? Or would you let the truth set you free? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Family Betrayal, like this video, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapter of truth and redemption.